Welcome to WikiPodcast.
Glad to be here.
We're kicking off a pretty fascinating mini-series today. It's a deep dive into medieval and religious philosophy.
Yeah, some heavy hitters in this period.
Definitely. And to start, we're tackling a real giant, someone whose ideas, well, they still echo today, Augustine of Hippo.
Augustine, absolutely foundational.
We've got a whole stack of insights on him, this towering figure. Our mission really is to pull out what's most crucial. Help you understand his lasting impact.
On both Christian theology and Western thought.
Exactly, without getting totally lost in the weeds.
Yeah.
Okay, so Augustine of Hippo, who was he, beyond just the name we hear?
Right. Well, he was born Aurelius Augustinus back in 354. This was in Thagaste, part of Numidia, modern-day Algeria, basically.
Yeah, so North African.
Yes, of Berber origin, though heavily Romanized. He became a theologian, a philosopher, and eventually the Bishop of Hippo Regius. That's where the Abo Hippo comes from. And he's considered, rightly so, one of the most important church fathers. We're talking the Latin church in the patristic period. That's the era of those early church leaders.
Okay.
He lived until 430. And what's really significant, I think, is how his work was kind of a bridge.
A bridge? How so?
It connected the intellectual world of ancient philosophy with the new ideas bubbling up in the medieval period.
Right.
He profoundly shaped both philosophy and Western Christianity for, well, centuries.
Wow. A North African Berber shaping Western thought.
Yeah.
So fundamentally, it's quite something. You mentioned writings. These weren't just minor texts.
No, not at all. Foundational stuff. Think of the City of God.
Right.
That was his huge theological and philosophical response to the sack of Rome.
A massive event.
Huge. Then there's On Christian Doctrine, which laid out how to interpret Scripture, and Confessions.
Confessions, that one always comes up. It feels different somehow.
It is. It's remarkable, really. It blends this deeply personal story with intense philosophical and theological exploration. He digs into time, causality, free will.
All within his life story.
Exactly. It basically invented a new kind of introspective writing, autobiography mixed with deep thought. Still resonates today.
Why do you think Confessions has endured so strongly? Is it just the personal aspect?
Well, that's a huge part of it. It's Augustine wrestling with his own desires, his, intellectual journey, his search for meaning. It's very human, but it's intertwined with these profound theological insights, that mix of vulnerability and sheer intellectual power. Yeah, that's captivated readers for over 1,000 years.
Okay, let's rewind a bit then. Go back to the beginning. What were the key influences on the young Augustine before the famous conversion?
Well, his upbringing was a bit of a mix. His mother, Monica, she's famous for her devout Christian faith.
Right.
But his father, Patricius, was actually a pagan. He did convert, but only right at the end of his life.
Interesting dynamic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And while the family was likely Berber, as I said, they were heavily Romanized, spoke Latin at home. Augustine definitely saw himself as a Roman African.
And his education.
Classical, Latin literature, pagan beliefs, standard stuff for the time, in Medorus first.
And wasn't there some story about stealing pears? Seems like a weird detail to remember.
Yes, the pear theft. It sounds minor, but he makes a big deal of it in Confessions.
Oh, why?
Because, he says, he and his friends stole them not because they were hungry, but kind of for the thrill of doing wrong, the shared transgression. For him, it became this crucial early insight into sin, choosing a lesser good, the fleeting buzz of stealing over a greater good. It foreshadows a lot of his later thinking on human motivation and, well, sin.
A childhood prank with deep philosophical roots. Okay, so after that early education.
He went on to study rhetoric in Carthage, got funding from a local benefactor, actually.
Carthage, big city.
Yeah. And that's where he initially embraced more hedonistic lifestyle, maybe trying to fit in.
Sounds about right for a student.
But then he read Cicero, Hortensius specifically, and that apparently just sparked something, a real passion for philosophy, for wisdom, for truth.
So, a turning point. From pleasure-seeking to philosophy.
A classic trajectory, yeah. And then, interestingly, he got involved with Manichaeism.
Manichaeism,
Well,
despite his Christian mother.
Yep. It was a dualistic religion, saw the world as a battleground between good and evil, light and darkness. His mother, Monica, was not happy about it.
I can imagine.
Also, during his time in Carthage, he entered a long-term relationship, a concubinage really, and had his son, Adeodatus. He was apparently very bright.
It's a lot happening.
Definitely. His ambitions then took him to Rome and then Milan. He landed a really prestigious job there as a professor of rhetoric.
Milan seems key. Was that where things started to shift again?
Hugely important. He started getting disillusioned with Manichaeism, finding inconsistencies. That led him towards skepticism for a bit.
Outing everything.
Kind of. But then other influences started pulling him towards Christianity, his mother's persistent faith, obviously, but also Neoplatonism.
Neo what now?
Neoplatonism, a school of philosophy building on Plato, big emphasis on a transcendent ultimate reality, the one. It gave him a way to think about God that wasn't, purely material.
Yeah.
And his friend Simplicianus was pushing him that way too. But the really big figure in Milan was Ambrose, the bishop.
Ambrose of Milan, famous orator, right?
Exactly. Ambrose's rhetorical skill really impressed Augustine, the rhetorician, but also his character.
So it wasn't just the arguments?
No, it was Ambrose himself. Augustine had initially doubted he could find, intellectual depth in Christianity, but Ambrose really changed his mind, became a mentor figure.
And all this led up to the famous conversion.
It did. Late August 386. He was 31. The story he tells is incredibly vivid. He hears a child's voice chanting, Tolelege, Tolelege.
Take up and read, take up and read.
Precisely. He takes it as a divine sign, opens Paul's letter to the Romans, and reads a passage, Romans 13:13-14, about putting aside debauchery and putting on the Lord Jesus Christ. It just hit him right where he was.
Wow. That take up and read moment. It's iconic. Really speaks to the power of Scripture for him.
Absolutely. A moment of personal revelation. So he was baptized by Ambrose, Easter Vigil 387, along with his son Adeodatus.
And this whole journey is in Confessions.
It's central to it. The emotional, intellectual, spiritual struggle leading up to that baptism. After his mother died, he eventually returned to Africa, to Hippo Regius, and became a priest in 391.
And from priest, he quickly rose in prominence, especially as a preacher.
Oh yeah, he was a renowned preacher. We actually have over 350 of his sermons preserved.
That many.
Yep. Shows how influential he was. He spent a lot of time preaching against Manichaeism, the beliefs he used to hold.
Makes sense.
And his sermons, they were often recorded by stenographers. He was apparently very skilled rhetorically, using analogies, metaphors, making complex ideas relatable. The goal for him was always the salvation of his audience.
So preaching, then bishop.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big step up in terms of, power and responsibility.
Huge. He became coadjutor bishop, like an assistant bishop with the right to succeed around 395, and then full bishop of Hippo shortly after. That's when he really became Augustine of Hippo.
And this is when he wrote his biggest works.
Yes.
Oh.
His most influential period, Confessions, was written around 397, 398, and then the City of God he started after Rome was sacked in 410. Trying to make sense of it all, theologically.
The City of God, a cornerstone. As bishop, he also developed some really fundamental Christian doctrines, didn't he? Tackled some major issues.
Absolutely. His time as bishop was incredibly formative for Christian theology. Take his view of human nature, Christian anthropology.
Okay.
He saw humans as this perfect unity of soul and body. He even compared it to a marriage, the closeness.
Interesting analogy.
But he argued this harmony got broken by the fall, by sin. The soul, which he saw as this rational thing meant to rule the body, ended up in conflict with it.
And his view on creation, Genesis, he didn't take the 6 days literally.
No, not in a 24-hour sense. He argued God created everything simultaneously, instantly.
So 6 days.
More like a logical framework, a way to organize the act of creation conceptually, maybe based on numbers, not physical time passing. He actually referenced a passage in Sirach about God creating all things at once.
Fascinating. What about the church itself? Ecclesiology, right? That was a big fight with the Donatists.
Exactly. The Donatist controversy was huge in North Africa. They insisted sacraments weren't valid if the priest who performed them had lapsed during persecution.
They wanted a pure church.
Pretty much. Augustine argued against this. He developed this idea of the church having two aspects: visible, the institution, the people, the sacraments you see, and invisible, the true elect, known only to God.
Because the visible church could have sinners in it.
Yes, inevitably. He said the visible church would contain both the good and the wicked, like wheat and tares, right up until the end times. This countered the Donatist push for purity now. He also strongly upheld apostolic succession bishops as successors to the apostles.
Okay. And then there's original sin. Probably one of his most famous, maybe infamous doctrines.
Definitely well known and debated. He developed this largely against Pelagianism. Pelagius taught that humans could achieve righteousness through their own efforts, downplaying Adam's sin.
And Augustine disagreed. Strongly.
Very strongly. He argued Adam and Eve's sin, maybe foolishness then pride, or pride then disobedience. He wasn't totally fixed on the order fundamentally wounded human nature.
Wounded how?
Through what he called concupiscence. It's often translated as lust, but it's broader, like disordered desire. It affects our intelligence, our will, our appetites. We're inherently drawn towards sin.
So we inherit this.
That was his argument. Original sin is transmitted generation to generation through this concupiscence, maybe through the act of procreation itself. It makes humanity a massa damnata.
A damned mass. That sounds bleak.
It's pretty stark, yeah. He basically introduced the idea of inherited guilt, not just a tendency to sin, how exactly it's transmitted. Theologians have argued about that for centuries.
Okay, the damned mass. How did that connect to his ideas about predestination? Seems linked.
Very closely linked. See, initially, Augustine thought predestination was based on God knowing who would choose to believe. God foresees it.
Right. Thanks.
But later, especially fighting Pelagianism, his view shifted. He came to argue that because our will is so damaged by original sin, even the act of faith, the choice to believe, has to be a gift from God. It's God's grace causing faith.
So God chooses who gets the grace.
That's the implication. Whether he taught double predestination, God actively choosing some for salvation and actively choosing others for damnation, that's still debated by scholars, it's complex.
Very complex. And thinking about salvation, sacraments, what were his key ideas there? You mentioned the Donatists.
Right. That fight really shaped his sacramental theology. He made this key distinction between the regularity and the validity of sacraments. A sacrament performed outside the Catholic Church, say by a Donatist priest, might be irregular, but it could still be valid. Its validity, he argued, doesn't depend on the priest's personal holiness.
Okay. So it works regardless of the minister.
As long as it's performed with the right form and intention, yes. The power comes from Christ, through the act itself, ex opere operato, from the work performed. That was a knockout blow to the Donatist position.
That's a huge deal theologically.
Massive. He also firmly believed in the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist and was a major advocate for infant baptism, linking it to washing away original sin.
So clearly a giant in theology.
Yeah.
But he's also seen as a major philosopher. Where did he contribute philosophically?
Well, in epistemology, the theory of knowledge, he had this idea of divine illumination.
God lighting things up?
Kind of. The idea is our human reason isn't enough on its own to grasp eternal truths. God has to actively, illuminate our minds to allow us to recognize these intelligible realities.
Interesting. What else?
He tackled the problem of other minds. How do we know other people have thoughts and feelings like us? He used an argument from analogy. Their behavior is like ours, so they probably have minds like ours.
Seems reasonable.
And interestingly, he also stressed how much we rely on testimony, on authority for knowledge. We don't figure everything out ourselves. We learn a lot from what others tell us.
True. And he wasn't just abstract philosophy, right? He weighed in on practical ethics, like just war.
Indeed. He thought Christians should ideally be pacifists personally, but in a fallen world, defending against serious injustice might be necessary. A necessary evil, you could say. But it had to be authorized by a legitimate authority.
Were there conditions?
Oh, yes. The aim had to be long-term peace. It should be defensive, a last resort, not aggressive or preemptive. His ideas formed the basis of just war theory in the West.
And the big one, free will. Always a philosophical headache. How did Augustine grapple with that, especially given his theology of grace and sin?
He wrestled with it intensely throughout his career. Initially, he taught that humans and angels were created with genuine free will. They could choose good or evil. Sin wasn't inevitable.
Okay, standard view.
But after the Pelagian controversy, around 412, his view darkened, you might say. He started arguing that post-fall humanity still has free will, but only the freedom to sin.
Only to sin. How does that work?
Our will is so bound by concupiscence, so weakened, that without God's special intervention, God's grace, we can't choose the good, can't choose to believe. Grace becomes absolutely necessary.
So is that still free will?
That's the million-dollar question. The Catholic Church generally says his teaching is compatible with free will, often interpreting it as God having perfect foreknowledge of our free choices, rather than God overriding our will. But it's tricky.
Sounds it. Did he have other related ideas? Like natural law?
Yes, he argued for a lex naturalis, a natural law, something embedded in human nature, recognizable through reason and conscience. And he famously argued that an unjust law, one that goes against this natural law, isn't really a law at all.
An unjust law is no law at all. That's Augustine.
It's strongly associated with him and his influence, yes. The implication being you don't have a moral obligation to obey it.
Powerful idea. Moving beyond those core concepts,
Hmm.
what about his views on the social issues of his day? Slavery, for instance.
Right. Slavery was, of course, widespread in the Roman Empire. Augustine saw it as a product of sin, something contrary to God's original plan for humanity.
Did he advocate abolition?
Not outright abolition in a modern sense, but he definitely encouraged owners to free their slaves' manumission. And interestingly, he argued slavery actually harmed the soul of the owner more than the enslaved person, corrupting influence.
What about his views on Jewish people? That's often a fraught topic in Christian history.
It is. Augustine believed God had chosen the Jews as a special people, but that their scattering across the world after rejecting Christ fulfilled prophecy. Crucially, though, he argued against harming them.
Why?
He believed they should be allowed to live in Christian lands as a kind of living testimony to the Old Testament roots of Christianity,
Yeah.
and as a warning. It was a complex and, for its time, somewhat protective stance, even if the reasoning seems uncomfortable today.
Okay. And his views on sexuality, men and women. Shaped by his theology, I imagine.
Very much so. He made a sharp distinction between Caritas love focused on God, godly love, and Cupiditas selfish desire, lust.
Lust bad, love good.
Basically. He thought that after the fall, sexual desire, lust, became the means of procreation. But he saw it as inherently tied to that concupiscence, that disordered desire stemming from original sin.
So even marital sex.
Even marital sex, while necessary for children, was seen as perpetuating this fallen state, transmitting original sin. It's a pretty negative view of sexuality by modern standards.
Under women.
He definitely praised women's roles in the church and their piety, think of his mother. But he also reflected the patriarchal views of his time, believing women were created for men and were physically subordinate.
Right. Given his own background in rhetoric and education, did he have thoughts on teaching, pedagogy?
Yes, quite developed ideas, actually. He was big on critical thinking, students actively engaging, not just passively receiving. He liked community learning, adapting methods to students' backgrounds. He thought dialectic, reasoned, back-and-forth discussion was the best way to learn. And crucially, he stressed humility. Intellectual pride, he thought, blocks true understanding.
Humility in learning. Makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, one last area, and it's a tough one. Coercion. Especially regarding the Donatists. His views changed, right?
They did, and it's a really complex, often troubling part of his legacy. Initially, he was all for persuasion. Argue, reason, convince the Donatists to rejoin the main church.
But it didn't work.
Well, the Donatist movement was deeply entrenched, and there was violence on both sides, frankly. Seeing the lack of progress and the ongoing conflict, Augustine gradually came to support state intervention. Coercion.
Using force.
Yes. He argued it could break the cycle of violence and maybe make people more receptive to hearing the arguments later, sort of compel them into a space where they could be reasoned with.
That sounds problematic.
It does. He famously used the line from the parable of the Great Feast, compel them to come in, to justify it theologically.
Wow.
But to be fair, he did argue for limits. He opposed extreme severity, torture, execution of heretics. He wanted correction, not destruction. But still, supporting state coercion in religious matters is a significant and debated part of his impact.
It's a stark reminder, isn't it? Even these towering figures, their views can be challenging through a modern lens. But looking at the whole picture, his overall impact is just undeniable. He shaped so much.
Oh, massively. His influence on Western Christian thought. It's probably second only to the Apostle Paul, and even Paul is often read through Augustine.
Right.
He was huge for Thomas Aquinas, other medieval thinkers. Then the Protestant reformers, Luther, Calvin, they drew heavily on him, especially his ideas on grace, sin, predestination.
So Catholics and Protestants both claim him in different ways.
In many ways, yes. His arguments against magic influenced later attitudes towards witchcraft. His idea of the heavenly city has even echoed in secular political thought.
And philosophy, beyond theology.
Definitely. His introspective method in Confessions influenced continental philosophy, phenomenology, hermeneutics. Thinkers like Husserl, Heidegger, Hannah Arendt engaged with him. Bertrand Russell was influenced by his thoughts on time. His writings just keep getting reread, reinterpreted, debated by theologians, philosophers, historians.
Augustine's journey, then, from this, restless seeker in North Africa to a foundational figure for millennia of Western thought, it really offers so much insight into theology, philosophy, the human condition.
Absolutely. His wrestling with sin, grace, free will, God, time. These questions don't go away. They keep resonating.
Well, we hope this deep dive has illuminated some of the key parts of Augustine's life and his incredible enduring influence. And really, this is just the start of our exploration into medieval and religious philosophy.
It really is. What's fascinating to consider, maybe, is how one person, grappling with the ideas and crises of his time, managed to create something, a synthesis of classical thought and Christian belief that would set the course for so much of Western civilization. His questions are still, in many ways, our questions.
Thanks for listening. Write us in the comments your opinion on the episode and what other topics you would like us to talk about. Subscribe to the channel to help us reach more listeners. Thank you and have an amazing day.